The title is giving Stephen Sondheim. Hi there, I'm Nicole Wilbur, and this is where I think out loud about story. Today we are reviewing a writing and storytelling craft book by the story guru, John Yorke. I have very strong opinions on craft books. I think that they are potentially useful to many different people, but how useful they are to you will depend on who you are and what you're after, etc. So in this review, I'm going to talk about what this book is, some of the main things you will learn in it, and then I'm going to do pros and cons to help you figure out if this craft book is for you. So let's get right into it. So Into the Woods by John Yorke, How Stories Work and Why We Tell Them, is a book about story structure. John Yorke is a well-known, in theory, I've never heard of him, but he worked on TV shows like EastEnders, Shameless, Life on Mars, Wolf Hall, all in the UK. So he worked with the BBC. So he is someone who has practiced in the art of storytelling, and he sat down to write a book about it. So the book is divided into 5 acts or 5 parts, and it's an attempt to explore, quote unquote, the beauty of story structure and to understand why it is so pervasive. He brings up an example at the very beginning, saying if you got a child to tell a story, most likely they would say something that has beginning, middle, and end, or an inciting incident, a complication, and a resolution. So in Act 1, he talks about story and 3-act and 5-act structure. That's one of the things that's most unique about the book is an exploration of 5-act structure. And an argument, I wouldn't say an argument that it's better than 3-act, but he really goes to the origins of 5-act structure and 3-act structure, how 5-act is what Shakespeare does because of drama, and how 3-act evolved because we didn't need to take breaks every 20, 30 minutes in the theater anymore to go refill our drinks, and we were now sitting down at movies, theaters, etc. He also talks about how character change typically plays out in those acts, and there's a lot of interesting examples and looks at Shakespeare, theater. He also gives a nice map of how the character learning is broken into different acts, and he uses this graphic a couple of times. I'm just going to give you this here. He calls the 3D roadmap of change, and so on here he has Act 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the change of character, which he defines as a gaining and incorporation, assimilation of knowledge or acceptance of knowledge. Basically, he talks about the major structure of the 5 acts being, these are my notes, sorry. 1, there is a problem. 2, the protagonists go on a journey. 3, they find a solution. 4, they return. And 5, the problem is solved. He also talks about the importance of the midpoint in there and how the midpoint is a knowledge breakthrough. In Act 2, he really goes into fractal structures. And I would say Act 2 or Part 2 is the section that is really the core of the book. He talks about acts having 3 parts to them with 2 turning points, so an inciting incident and a midpoint. He calls this the tripartite form, and that's a setup, a confrontation, and a climax or resolution. He also digs back into the 5-act structure there, and then talks about Indiana Jones and how that has a 7-act structure. He makes a very compelling argument for that. And we hear all about fractals. Now, fractals, if you don't know, from an art perspective, it's when a picture is made up of the same repeating parts of the whole. So the idea, which is also one that Sean Coyne talks about in the story grid, if you're familiar with that methodology, is that a story is made up of this tripartite structure, and every act has the structure, and every scene has the structure. And so every piece, micro and macro, is made up of the same core elements. In Act 3 or Part 3, the chapter, there's only one chapter in it, and it's called Showing and Telling. He talks about the Kuleshov effect, which is basically the idea that audiences want to figure stuff out, and so give them 2 + 2 rather than giving them 4. So many notes. In Act 4, he talks about character, and there's also 2 chapters in there on exposition and subtext. Basically, don't do exposition and do subtext. Summed it up for you. I really like what he talked about when it came to character. He talks about how tension or characters are defined by the tension between how they wish to be perceived and how they really are, and how that's a reflection of real life. And I really love that insight. It's obviously true for, he's really coming at it from a drama perspective, but from a book writing perspective, that's one of the core reasons that we read, right? Is because we can see inside someone's head, and then we can see the dissonance between what they're projecting to the world, and that's the juiciest stuff. In Act 5, he talks about TV structure. He touches on theme and then common arguments for telling stories. He also talks about why TV series tend to be bad after the first 2-3 seasons and why they really fall off a cliff. And it all has to do with character development. So nothing super revolutionary, but because he's worked on so many TV shows, there was super interesting insights in there. So that is the main things you can take away, or the main topics covered in this book. I would say his sort of main messages are around the 5-act structure and how character change and character acceptance and assimilation of knowledge is part of that. And then the fractals and sort of mirror image idea is also a huge one. He has really great diagrams too, where he'll show the kind of 3 core actions a character takes in the first act of a movie, and then the 3 core actions they take in the 5th act of a movie, and how they're literally mirror images of each other. And that is really interesting. So it's very much that character meets structure intersection, 5 acts, fractals. It's a good time. It's a really good time. So let's talk about the pros and cons of why this book may or may not be for you. Pro number 1, the way it's written. So craft books run the gamut, right? They run from overly fluffy, oh my gosh, I know you want a story about a story and you're so scared, but it's going to be okay, to very like overly complex, to story engineering, which is like, if you don't do it this way, you suck. This one is very intellectual and thoughtful. It's well researched, so it's closer to John Truby than it is to Save the Cat. I did enjoy it. I found it a little bit dense, like the pages, there's a lot of text on the pages. So it's a lot to get through. It took me a while to read through. It wasn't quite as readable for me as Anatomy of Story, but it was fine. Good stuff in there. I always think that most craft books could be a little bit shorter. The writers could condense a little bit. And that is true of this one as well as most other books, except for Anatomy of Story, because again, heaven. But all right, the con here is this: it's somewhat less readable than a book like Save the Cat or Story Genius, because it is taking a little bit more of a philosophical, intellectual approach. He brings in lots of quotes from other scholars and things. I just opened a page and he's like, Shakespearean act structure, a quote from American scholar Thomas Baldwin. And he's looking at early things of literature. So really, really interesting, but not the most easy read by the pool kind of book. Pro number 2, so many gems. His discussion of act structure and fractals and character of evolution within the structure are gold. They're so great. And I showed you that diagram. I love that diagram. I love looking at character change as an acceptance of knowledge. I love the midpoint as a breakthrough of knowledge. I talked about that in my Why Save the Cat Doesn't Work video, where I'm like, the midpoint is not a false victory or a false defeat. It usually is not anyways. I really like the breakthrough of knowledge a lot better in reflecting stories that I've actually studied and looked at in the world. The con here is the book does wander a little bit. I didn't find the chapters on, for example, dialogue and exposition very useful, and they were kind of superfluous to the core message. Nothing in here is like, oh, that's horrible, bad. But I was like, I don't really know why we're talking about this, but sure, happy. And the TV stuff was super interesting, but it also felt a bit out of place. So I think potentially my main issue with this book is how it's organized. I told you that it's labeled Act 1 through 5, and it's Act 1, home, Act 2, woodland, day, Act 3, the forest, Act 4, the road back, night, and Act 5, home again, changed. And it's aiming for this meta thing, right? Like that by reading the book, you're going through the 5 acts of story, and so you're learning about it, but it's also happening on a meta level, and it's all fractally. And frankly, the meta just was not working for me, because I didn't really understand what character and structural design and character individuation had to do with the road back night. There wasn't really a progression. For me. I suppose if you think of it as acquiring knowledge, and he introduces the knowledge and then digs deeper in it, and then you circle back to it in Act 5. I don't know. I just kind of wish that instead of calling it the road back night, he just called the section character. I feel like that would make it a lot easier for my mind to reference. I'm someone who I look at the table of contents to plan out what I'm going to learn. I look at it to refresh my memory. And Woodland Day is not doing it for me. Also, the home again change chapter doesn't make sense when you look at it from a meta perspective because it's mostly just about TV. So like why couldn't there be a chapter about television instead of home again? Anyways, that's honestly, it doesn't take away from the good content of the book. It's just a pedantic thing that I'm a little whatever about. Let's go on to the next pro, which is his theories feel very freeing to me. A lot of people will complain about the formulaic nature of something like Save the Cat or Steps and Anatomy of Story are so rigid or whatever. They're very lightweight in this book, but they're also powerful. I'm planning on applying his take on acts and his tripartite structure to my work in progress. It is actually solving a big problem for me because I've been having a really hard time thinking about it through 3-act structure. So that's awesome. I also like the harkening back to Shakespearean drama, and I think that looking at it from a 5-act perspective can really help you with the messy middle. So anything that will take a 25% of fun and games and help you structure it better and know what to put in there to move your audience is super valuable. And then the con, it's not a how-to book. No, it's not the most practical craft book I've ever read. There's definitely stuff in there you can use. As I said, I'm going to use the 5 acts for me, thinking about fractals, thinking about mirror images, thinking about the reflections of the actions the character take. All that stuff is practical, but it's just not written in a practical way. It's not like how to, you do this, 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 this. It's very much like, here is the theory, let's explore, how cool. So if you are looking for a very step-by-step guide, it might not be for you. If you know Brandon Sanderson, this book is very chef. It's not very cook. And finally, pro number 4 is the appendices. The appendices are golden. My favorite one in here is a chart of all of the story guru theories. So Save the Cat, John Truby, Hero's Journey, Robert McKee. I don't know if Robert McKee's actually in here. Does he have a story structure theory? Anyways, there's a million guys and one girl maybe? Anyways, all the story gurus are listed in the same page in a really cool chart where you can see how all story structure is basically the same, and you can compare and contrast how they lay it out. There's also appendices that dive deep into particular books. So Appendix 1 is the act structure of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. In Act 2, they look at Hamlet in structural form. So they're just he's able to dive deeper into things, and I think the appendices are really great for providing those extra examples because I love a case study, I love an example. And finally, con, not really a con, I found out that he just published a new book in February 2026. So now I have to go read that one. Yeah, not really a con, but I'm really looking forward. I think that one also has a weird name that does not scream storytelling. It's supposed to be really good. And so I'm super excited to go and read that one. So I would love to hear from you if you've read Into the Woods, what you think about it. Storycraft books are your favorites. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Nicole Wilbur. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, and I will see you next time.